Anybody else notice that face recognition doesn't work with a mask on? Yeah. First world problems, am I right? Shalom, Havarim, and hello, friends. Good to see you on this beautiful Sunday morning. We could have hit some bad weather here the last couple of days, but we have been blessed with this day. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Now, I heard a story this week. You thought I was going to skip the joke, didn't you? Heard a story this week about a man who was traveling through Maine, and he was walking along the beach, and he saw this stand set up. There was a sign that said, "Lobster tail, $5." Now, if you know lobster tail, you know that's the prime rib, the best part of prime rib. That's a strange metaphor. That's the best part of the lobster. So to get it for $5, that's something to be excited about. And this man thought, hey, I'm going to go ahead and try out this $5 lobster tail. So he approached the man with the sign, and he pulled out his $5 bill. He gave it to the man and said, "I would like the lobster tail, please." And the man pointed him to a chair. And strangely, the man followed him and sat down right beside him. And they sat there for a second, just kind of looking at the guy. And the customer said to him, he said, "Okay, I'm ready for the lobster tail." And the man looked at him and said, "Once upon a time, there was a lobster." And that has nothing to do with our sermon for today. How is he going to tie that into Romans 12? He is not. But we are not an overly liturgical church. We do get some woo-hoos. The woo-hoos are about as liturgical as we get. Occasionally there will be amens, and usually that's when I make a response about some college football team or something like that. So we're not real liturgical, but I want to push you out of your comfort zone today. All right, yeah, we're ready, aren't we? But it's going to be even more awkward than normal, because I'm going to ask you to say something that may come across a bit crude, a bit awkward, and maybe not feeling like it's the most church-like thing to say. But I'm going to ask you to say it, and then I'll explain it, and we'll reuse this phrase throughout the sermon this morning. Are you comfortable with that? You don't even know what I'm going to ask you to say. So roll with me on this. I'll explain why. The phrase I want you to say is, "Yeah, but did you die?" Can you say that with me? Yeah. But did you die? Okay, I should say it more like an angry mother. If you have hips, I really don't, I just go straight down. If you have hips, you can put your hands on them, maybe pop one to the side, and say, "Yeah, but did you die?" One more time, I'm going to gesture to you when you're supposed to say this. "Yeah, but did you die?" I first heard this phrase, I'm going to say, I think it was my brother-in-law that I first heard use this phrase. And I don't want to give him too much credit, but it seems to come from him. And the way he originally used it was with his daughter. And I think that she was telling on him for something. The way I remember it happening, and this is kind of a hypothetical situation, but it could have been something like this, was that he was driving somewhere with his daughter in the car, and he maybe swerved to not hit a squirrel, and then had like a run-in with some other traffic. So I imagine them coming home, and her going to my sister-in-law and saying, "Stacy, you won't believe it. Dad swerved to miss a squirrel, and he almost ran into oncoming traffic." And my brother-in-law would turn to her then and say, "Yeah, but did you die?" You understand the context? So this little phrase is very applicable. We found that during COVID-19, we can use this quite frequently in our parenting strategies. I'm not encouraging it. I'm not saying this is good parenting. I am saying it makes me feel better to say it. So there are times when, let's be honest, we all know people are a little cranky. It's a little frustrating, and it's been hot. And the kids maybe will complain about something. The city pools have been closed. So the kids might complain, "Oh, it's so hot. We can't even go to the pool. We are stuck all day inside our hot house." So I say, "Yeah, but did you die?" Turns out it doesn't just apply to children. We can use this among grown-ups as well. I try to not complain too much, but when I get in the mood, I let them come. It's been hot, I mentioned that, and we've been wearing masks now for several months. And I don't know about you, but I've got this nice beard going on, not of stubble or hair, but of acne. There are advantages to wearing the mask. The mask covers up the acne that the mask causes. But I get tired of going into places. I saw Ed Anderson at Lowe's one day, and I think I was at Lowe's for like 2 hours that day because, there's nothing else to do. We had a good conversation once we recognized who each other were. And I get so tired of this mask, and I might say to Sonia, I'm so tired of wearing this mask for hours at a time when I go into places like the hardware store, or when I go to get groceries, because I'm not a quick grocery getter. So I say, I can't believe I have to wear this mask all the time. And Sonia will say to me, popping that hip, saying to me, yeah, but did you die? Okay, you've got that, all right? You understand that part. We're going to come back to that, because first we actually need to talk about the Bible a little bit. For that phrase, yeah, but did you die? We'll come back up here shortly. All right, so we're looking at Romans chapter 12 today. And this is a passage that Mennonites really like. Mennonites like Romans chapter 12. We aren't as crazy about chapter 13. That's the submit to the governing authorities one. Yeah. So we have some problems with that. But Romans 12, we like this one. And the thing about Romans 12 is that it's got this cool layout. The first 8 verses fulfill the greatest commandment, or they're talking about the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is to love God. The verses 9 through the end of the chapter talk about the second greatest commandment, which is to love your neighbor. I gotta be careful with my gestures. I thought you might say, yeah, but did you? No. Hand gestures. Second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. So verses 1 through 8, love your God. We look at verse 1. Thank you, Stuart, for reading those verses. Verse 1 talks about offering your body as a living sacrifice. It's recognizing that this life that we've been given is a gift from God. And what are we called to do with that? We're called to give it back to God. And then verse 2, we know this one as well because this is very informative in our Anabaptist history. Do not be conformed to the ways of this world, but be transformed through the renewing of your mind. And our Anabaptist forebears and ancestors, and even the more conservative branches of Mennonite churches today, they've interpreted this in a certain way. Of course, that chin strap beard and those buttonless blouses, those cape dresses, that's what Paul was talking about, right? Paul was talking about not using electricity. Paul was talking about not driving a car because, of course, we know Paul never rode in a car, did he? No. We know the disciples did, right? In Acts chapter 1, I think it is, it says that all the apostles were in one accord, right? I've had a lot of time to work on these. You think they'd be better. But every generation has its own interpretations of what it means to not be conformed to the ways of the world. And I'd have no problem with people in years past translating this as a way of dress or a way of wearing a beard or whether or not to use certain items. That was their interpretation. And I think for us today, we have different ways of viewing this. I think the general point that we need to get out of this is that when the world looks different than Jesus, the church is called to look different than the world. Did you get that? If you get nothing else, this is your takeaway point this morning. When the world looks different than Jesus, we as a church are called to look different than the world. So Paul kind of sets this whole thing up by laying that out there, and then he goes on in verses 9 through the end of the chapter. I'll just give that a second. In verses 9 through the end of the chapter, he lays out all these different guiding principles for us. And each one I think you could spend a week preaching on. But no, it's really hard to have a sermon series whenever you meet like once a month outdoors. So I'm just going to try to shove it all together. And I'm going to preach from the end of the chapter towards the beginning. So what I want to do is jump ahead to verse 14, I think it is, and hit some of the highlights. So how does Paul call us to live different from the world? The first thing that he says is the church is to bless those who persecute us. Is that new to Paul? Or did somebody else say that? It wasn't a trick question. It's a Sunday school answer. Who said that first? Jesus said that. That's right. Answer is always Jesus. So Jesus said that too. Paul says, don't pay evil with evil. What are you supposed to repay evil with? You repay with good. He says, if your enemy is hungry, you feed them. If your enemy is thirsty, you give them water. Is this the ways of the world? No, this is different from the world. But this is very much the way of Jesus. So the church is called to look different from the world when the world looks different than Jesus. Now, when is the exception for this? If you get hurt financially by somebody, if they do have a bad business deal with somebody, then it's okay to not bless the person that persecutes you, right? Or if they say something bad about you behind your back, then you don't need to offer them food if they're hungry. No. When is the exception? There is none. The only one I can think of is when you die. So as long as you are living, no matter what the situation is, this teaching still applies. Hold that in mind as we look more at these verses. Because as long as we are living, this is our calling from God. So it's confession time now. And you're full of grace, right? You'll forgive me. I made a cardinal mistake, a cardinal sin. This week, actually it was just the week before, I did what I tell other people not to do. And I was on social media and I read the comments. I know. Never read the comments. And even worse, I read the comments on a political post. I know better than that. But I did it anyway. So don't judge me, please. But I'm going to use this as an example today. I'm joking, people. Lighten up. It's okay. I did really read these comments. A friend of mine from high school, she posted something very political. And I was going to try to avoid actually talking about what she posted, but I think it's helpful for the illustration to go into it. So try not to get lost in the politics of it and focus on the point that I'm trying to make. So this friend of mine posted on Facebook recently that the Democratic National Convention, which was recently completed, she posted that the Democrats at the convention took out the word "under God" from the Pledge of Allegiance. That was her post. That was all it said. Now somebody else responded to that, and they pointed out to her that in the main session, they included "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. It was a small subgroup of the Democratic Convention that excluded that line. So they started going back and forth and back and forth. And there was a lot of criticism of one another's parties. And a lot of criticism turned from the parties to the individuals. And it was not only an attack on Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it was an attack on the person who posted the original post and the person who was responding. It quickly went from a political attack to an ad hominem attack, attacking characters and individuals. People were calling one another liars. People were questioning one another's commitments to following Jesus. These were both followers of Jesus, Christians. These are sisters in Christ going back and forth, calling each other's names. Finally, one of them just dismisses the other one and says, essentially, "Bye, Felicia," something like that. I don't remember her name. But my friend kept going back and forth with this other person. And eventually she asked the rhetorical question. She said, "Don't you think that God is upset about being left out of the Pledge of Allegiance?" I'm not one to get involved in things, and I didn't. But in my mind, I get involved in things. And I really wanted to say, I think God is more upset with the way you're treating one another than being left out of a pledge. Now, if I really wanted to get cantankerous and get in there, I probably could have questioned, the first allegiance to Jesus rather than to the nation or to states. We as Mennonites have issues with saying pledges anyways, but I didn't want to go there. I didn't even go with the lesser one. But I just noted, you're so worried about these two words, and I'm not saying they're not important, that you're willing to defame another person, to talk bad about another person. And in my mind, that's exactly what Paul is warning against when he says, don't be conformed to the ways of the world, be transformed through the renewing of your mind. Now, I'm not now, or nor have I ever said that we shouldn't enter into debates or discussions on things. Absolutely, that's fine. Talking about issues is a good thing because we want to grow. We need to grow. To better understand one another, we have to have these difficult conversations. But when we start calling people names, when we start dismissing them, when we start blowing them off and questioning their commitment to Jesus, then we have taken after the world and not the ways of Jesus. So are we allowed to critique? Well, yes, we're allowed to critique. Are we allowed to condemn other people whenever we disagree with them politically? No. What was our phrase? Yeah, but did you die? If the answer is no, then you still have to follow the rules. We are living in a very contentious time. If you haven't noticed that, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm jealous of you. I wish I could live in your world. We're living in a very contentious political time. But as long as you're living, the teachings of Paul, the teachings of Jesus still apply. All right, well, let's lighten it up a bit and move to the second half of this passage. We're going to move back up to chapter 12, verse 9. And Paul says something very simple here. He says, love must be sincere. Now, I think that I was ruined, or at least the word love was ruined for me for a long period of time because of 1990s boy bands. I blame NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys for my misunderstanding of the word love. You are my fire, my one desire, but I don't think they quite nailed what biblical love is. That's a line from Backstreet Boys, and you're lucky I didn't sing it for you today. You're welcome. Don't even get me started on New Kids on the Block. You know, that was my formative years there. But what is biblical love? Well, biblical love is not simply this feeling that you get. It's an outpouring of emotions. It's this action that you take. And all I need to do to find a really good example of biblical love is to go back a few weeks ago. Was it maybe 3 weeks now since we had the first big flood in Stanton? You remember that? I remember waking up on Sunday morning. I woke up probably 6 a.m. I had gone to bed the night before. There was a little bit of water trickling through my basement. I went down at 6 o'clock in the morning to find about 2 inches of water standing in the entire basement. Our sump pump had failed in the middle of the night. About 2 years ago, I finished our basement. Oh, I know, right? I put laminate flooring down, drywall on all the walls, and MDF baseboard. So it's the cheap stuff, but if you know MDF, you know it's also a sponge. So I took the first 2 hours that morning to haul things out of our basement, to set them outside, to either let them dry or throw them away in the trash. Our flooring, whenever I finally got the sump pump going again, after I got things cleared away, I noticed that there's a definite and permanent warp to this laminate flooring. That baseboard will never be the same again, and that's okay. I'll replace that somehow. But I start, what do I start thinking about? The money, the cost of it. So the first 2 hours till about 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning Sunday, I'm cleaning stuff out. I'm angry, I'm disappointed. I put in all this work. This has been ruined, or at least made a lot worse. And finally, I got done what I needed to get done. So I went outside and I started going for a walk. I was like, I just got to clear my mind. I walk into Gypsy Hill Park. You know what the first thing I see is? The duck pond, right. I see the gates that have been crashed by the waters roaring through and all the debris hanging in the fence. I see that, but you know what else I see? I see people helping people. So I go through the park and I turn left and I go out to Churchville Avenue and I hang a right on Lewis Street. And I see a friend there who lives right on Lewis. If you know Lewis Street flooded. There was an absolute river going down Lewis Street. This person's car had been ruined, a car that she's only had for a couple years. And she was experiencing a total loss. She said it's been totaled. But she mentioned all the people that had reached out to her and offered her to borrow a car. Lend her their car. And I kept walking down Lewis Street And I saw people carrying things out of these buildings to allow them to dry. I saw people helping people they probably didn't even know get things out of their shops. I saw people down at the wharf pressure washing the mud off the concrete and the blacktop. I saw people helping others haul their cars out of the wharf because they were no longer able to drive them because of the damage from the rain. I saw people helping cut drywall out of their favorite pupuseria. I saw people praying for people in need. I stopped and talked to Gonzo. Does anybody know Gonzo? Gonzo's Pollo? Gonzo's Chicken? Gonzo has this food truck right there on Central Avenue. And I talked to Gonzo a little bit. He's Peruvian. He's fun to talk to. He's got this wonderful accent. And just talking to him a little bit, he said he was spared from the flooding because his food truck sits high enough. And he told me, but he's still working because he was making food for the people who were affected around him to give to them. So what does love look like? What does sincere love really look like? It looks like helping your friend carry stuff out of their basement when they've experienced a flood. It looks like tearing drywall out of your favorite pupuseria because they've experienced this flooding. It looks like pressure washing the bistro because they had this mud come through their basement level. It looks like serving chicken to your neighbors because they can't take a break to make their own lunch. Paul calls on people to have sincere love for one another. So as I'm walking there, and I start with this depressed feeling that I've lost several $1,000s worth of flooring and baseboards in my basement, I had to ask myself that question. And it's coming again here, folks. You ready? What was that question?
Well,
yeah, but did you die? I realized at that moment I'm experiencing loss, but so are so many other people. And as long as I'm living, the calling upon my life does not change. I am still called to love other people, to love one another, even my enemies, even those who persecute me. My love is called to be sincere, to help those who are in need, whether that's feeding the hungry, giving water to the thirsty, simply saying a prayer for those in need, offering of my finances to those who are hurt worse than I am. We're called to make love sincere. So I want to transition this time